Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wait, Hold Up, What? Today is an interesting episode because it's actually the start of a series that we're about to do. And over the next few weeks, I want us to talk about women and money and a little bit about how money is used to hold women down. We're going to speak with a wealth manager on ways to combat this and also speak on some of the historical implications and political weight of these things and how they're used. But today, I want to set a stage, if you will, and I want to talk about progress because there has been a lot of progress when it comes to women and money. And the reason that I want to set that stage is because in the world that we're currently living in, there's all this messaging and noise, and it can be really easy to get dejected as people are trying to backtrack on our rights and the abilities that we have to access certain things. And so, also looking at progress, I think, is important to kind of level state where we are. And specifically, I want to talk about progress when it comes to women and money. I want to use it to set up for these future episodes and give us a baseline of understanding. Hopefully, that means you'll watch all the episodes, not just one or two, and you'll share them with your friends, and we'll all of a sudden become so well known. Anyways, that was my little aside. Clearly, I'm feeling a little punchy today. Okay. So, as we level set, sometimes this means sort of stating the obvious. And I think it's the only way to ensure that we're all on the same page. And that is that the United States, which is where I live and born and bred, is a capitalistic country and culture. In short, money equals power. Historical context will show that the people with the money, they will do anything to keep it. That is not just historically, right? We see that right now. That often means that they prevent others from accessing it for fear that that means less than us. It's so interesting because culturally there's all this stuff about a growth mindset, and yet even the people that preach a growth mindset oftentimes don't use it when it's talking about their own money and the ability for others to have money and this kind of shared growth mindset. So this has manifested itself through racism, xenophobia, classism, sexism, and all the isms that you can think of. And in fact, it actually works against this idea of a more perfect union, right? A very large cornerstone of this is religion or fundamentalism and ideas that use power and coercion to keep people in their place, which is a direct opposition to these supposed values that were used to create this country in the first place. Clearly, soapboxy, don't worry, I'm not about to go on this like anti-religion rant. I'm just working to set the stage. I also noticed in that very moment how fast I was talking. And I've actually recorded a few episodes today. And because they are all in and around this topic, my adrenaline is pumping and my excitement is pumping because this is my sweet spot. This is what I love to talk about because there's some anger and there's some ire in it, but there's also some hope and some perspective. And so it gets me jazzed. I don't know what the word is. Anyways, so all of this is happening while still using the idea that we as Americans are in this land of opportunity and that that land of opportunity is for all, right? It's this backdrop that provides hope. And it's kind of what we were built on, right? The idea of immigrants coming over here for a better life. And while the powers that be, the money holders, right? They actively work to prevent that American dream from happening for so many based on all these ridiculous standards of who is worthy and who is not worthy. Okay, I thought the soapbox was done, but the initial one is done now. I will not admit or deny that there might be a few other soapboxes during this. But let's talk about the positive stuff for women, right? So, one of the tenets of humanity is this need to conquer, to innovate, and to create. And in doing so, many of those innovations have made change possible. It's slow. Oh gosh, sometimes it feels so slow, right? Or sometimes it feels like we take a few steps forward and it's like, yay, and we celebrate, and then we take double the steps backwards. And so it's like we're starting all over again. And that momentum can make it feel so, so slow. And more often than not, innovation happens without us actually realizing the full context of those changes and what they are informing, right? Or sometimes an innovation or a an advancement will be made and we don't know how it will benefit or harm people until much, much later. Um, and that's because of the noise, right? It can be so hard to distinguish what's good or what's bad, especially when different people tell you different things. And so we're not going to start at the complete beginning, but I do want to give some historical contexts. 1837, so not quite 200 years ago, is really when women first gain entry to institutions of higher education. Oberlin College started admitting female students in 1837. More than 200 years after Harvard was founded for education of men. And in colonial America, there was no other precedence for women in higher education. So that's kind of one historical precipice, right? We know that education matters. We know through the UN and all of these global funds for women how important education is to the equality of women and to the health of a society. So then you've got the mid 1800s, and this was the first time that married women in the US uh, could own property, right? Or I'm sorry, I've said that wrong. In the mid 1800s, married women could not own property. It was only allowed for men. And so in 1848, there was an act. I never know law act difference between that terminology, but then the Married Women's Property Act was passed that ensured women's holdings remained her own upon marriage, and soon other states followed in that. So 1848, right? This is still a little over 150 years ago. It's not this long held standard, and at that time, it was only married women. 1857 to 1864, the original state constitutions of 3 states, that's Kansas, Nevada, and Oregon. Woo-hoo, I can't believe I just made that noise. Sorry, but I'm from Oregon. I got excited. It guaranteed women the right to own property regardless of marital status. But remember, 1864 or 1857, 1864, and that's only 3 states. So then in 1862, I know, lots of dates. I'm just trying to set a stage. 1862, the U.S. Homestead Act allowed any household head of household, including women, to claim land in the Western territories. So progress was happening as we moved west. So no more history on that particular subject matter. It was just a context. So now we move into what would be considered more modern history, because maybe if you're listening, you had a parent or a grandparent that what we are about to talk about becomes relevant for. And so we start in World War I. A lot of people think about the labor movement and women as starting in World War II. And yes, Rosie the Riveter and all of those things that were happening in World War II, it certainly was a very defining moment in women in labor in this country. But it actually started in World War I. That set the stage, because they were recruited to work in ammunition factories, and then also the government recruited women, and they did these like mass campaigns and recruitment see, I'm talking too fast. Recruitment drives. So for the first time, it was not only acceptable for women to work, but it was actually encouraged for them to work. And they worked in areas that were formerly reserved for men. So some of the interesting places that they were able to work is railway guards, ticket conductors, buses and tram conductors, postal workers, police, firefighters, and bank tellers. Some women also worked on precision machinery and engineering, led cart horses on farms, and worked in civil service and factories. Of course, and this has not changed. It has changed some, sorry, but they received lower wages for doing the same work. And so that was where we saw some of the earliest kind of demands for equal pay. However, there also became this mass hysteria, both World War I and World War II, that because there were lower wages, people might keep the women on and the men wouldn't be able to get jobs. And so there was this big effort to say, hey, let's get them out of here. Um, Again, I could go on soapboxes. I'm not going to. Okay, so 1920. This is when the 19th Amendment was ratified and allowed women to vote. But no, it didn't. It allowed white women like myself and my grandmothers to vote, but it did not allow all women to vote. And so when we really look and celebrate, while this was a step in the right direction, this is not when women received equal opportunities as a whole. And I think it's important to put a note on that, because as we look at modern feminism, there's a lot of talk about white feminism versus an overall feministic approach, or Black women in feminism. And feminism only works when we are fighting for the rights of all women, whether that is women of color, whether that is women that think differently than us, whether that is transgender women, whether that is LGBTQ rights as an overarching thematic. It is only efficient and it is only productive when it works for all women. And so the modern movements have to do a better job of combining forces and interest to do the work for all of us, because it still creates systemic problems when it is not for all. The entire idea of all of this is equality for all, equity for all. And if we take that word all out of there, we are doing a disservice to the work that we're doing. Okay, I told you no more soapboxes, and that certainly was one. I think it is important to note 1920 19th Amendment. However, it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that all women were afforded the right to vote. So women's employment increased pretty drastically in World War II, from 23.6% of the working age population in 1914 to between 37 and 46%. There's some point after that, in 1918. So it's difficult in some ways to get an exact number. I think that's why we had that spread, because of domestic workers were excluded from those figures, and many women moved from domestic service into jobs that were part of the war effort. The employment of married women, interestingly enough, counted for nearly 40% of all female workers in 1918. Really, really fascinating, right? Because the ideas of the society at a time were that a woman shouldn't, quote unquote, if you're not watching and seeing me put air quotes, shouldn't have to work, that it's only single women or spinsters, if you will, that were required to work. Again, women were paid less than men. And then when men were coming back from the war effort, again, there were concerns that they wouldn't get hired when they returned from war, because of that financial thing. So they fought against that, and the women were then let go and men came inside. Now, when women did stay in those jobs, though, they did work alongside men, but again, for very, very much lower wages, which we still see today when we talk about gender parity. Today, the numbers range between about 81 and 83%. But again, this number is skewed because it is the number for white women and not for all women. And those range based on the ethnicity of women, Latin women, Black women, and even Asian women at varying levels of less money that it takes, that they get paid. Fumbling with my words. Hopefully it doesn't get in the way of the message. So That is the historical context, right? So that's where we came from and what sets the stage for our grandmothers, our mothers, ourselves, and our children. And I say that in succession because I am in my late 40s, and therefore there are 2 to 3 generations already after me, as scary as that is to say. So this becomes kind of the relevancy for how we got here. And a lot of it had to do with American ingenuity and inventions, right? Mother is Invention is the mother of, I don't know that quote, but mother and invention. So women, right? Okay, transitioning. 1946, something really amazing happened in 1946. I want people to shout it out, but there's no one in the audience. Okay, that is when electric washing machines came along and also indoor water pipes became widely available to American households. This is important because it is the start of a significant change in the amount of time it took to, quote unquote, keep a household. And this is what I talked about earlier. It is in my humble belief that the innovations that changed a way a house was run were so crucial to the advancement of women in society beyond these traditional gender roles, because it opened up time, and time is a resource, right? And also, I say this a lot now because I have a lot of time on my hands. A lot of time on your hands makes you question things. It makes you wonder if, wait, is this the way it should be working? Isn't there a better way, right? So not only is it that you have more free time that needs some sort of action or some sort of a work mentality in it, but it's also that you have this more time to think about your plight in the world, your life, your perspective of things, and if it could be better, worse, or in the middle. So other inventions, if just for fun, 1955 is the microwave, right? So now anybody can cook a meal. This also was that wave of TV dinners, right? And people eating on TV trays because television came into the lexicon. So your whole family would still have dinner together, but it would be in front of the television watching the same shows. And so you had America kind of captivated around a television, around less of a home cooked meal, and still somewhat together. 1960 is the first time that birth controls were made available widely. While not a home invention, it does, let's see, give access to more time on your hands if you're having less children. That's the least complicated and uncontroversial way I can say that. So there are other inventions, and we could do this whole history lesson, but I do want to mention one more, only because it's a modern invention. And so some people may not think of it in that way. But the invention of the Swiffer. The Swiffer sweeper was this idea that anybody could mop, and that mopping shouldn't take all this time and all this equipment and all these things, and we could simplify it, right? And by doing that, it became a multi-billion-dollar product in the PPG portfolio. And even when you watch the commercials today, you see more and more it is men and kids in the commercials swiffering and making house cleaning seem so easy and not a chore anymore. And it is those messages that changed gender roles in such major ways. And so I just think that's kind of a cool one to talk about. So, okay, that brings us kind of into about the 70s. 70s, for me, the big thing of the 70s is Title IX. Look, there's a lot of other things that happen. You do have the women's movement and all of those things that are occurring in there. But Title IX is such a hugely important one, and it gets talked about a lot today in people trying to take portions of it away. But one of the things that Title IX states, and I'm going to read this in exact so that I do not mess it up. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Okay, this is huge. It could go a lot of ways. For me and the work that I have always done, I spent 25 plus years in the sports industry. And so we talk about this a lot in relation to sports because this also give equal access to funding in some ways, for women to be able to compete in collegiate athletics. And the reason that this is a big deal is because it opened the doors for women in so many ways to access different parts of society, culture, and even just different personality traits that previously were maybe shunned or discouraged for women. So I always like to talk about competition being one of those things. This allowed women to be competitive and be unapologetic about being competitive. Now, this was not a perfect thing, not a perfect world, right? Even today, you can watch these commercials from different sports brands that talk about how women are portrayed when they are competitive or when they express anger or rage or any sort of emotion outside of what is considered feminine. We still receive blowback from it, right? But this was really this precipice for allowing that to happen. It was also a precipice for team collaboration, working together in groups. And it was working together in groups of women for a common cause. And that's important because when you look at the world around us, right, progress doesn't happen with one person doing one thing. It is all about collaboration. Any interview you ever had a job is going to have some sort of question about teamwork, collaboration, working across the aisle, the organization, politics, right? The organization, working with different functions, and how well you can pull people together and collaborate. And if this wasn't even an option for people to experience or learn how to do beforehand, you could understand why this would be so revolutionary for women. Uh, and so they're learning how to compete. They're learning what it means to be on a team that has equal forces at work, if you will. Very important. Also in the 70s is when credit cards, women were first allowed to apply for credit in their own name. This history lesson is so important because, as we will talk about over the coming weeks, the only way to equality is the ability to access wealth. At me all you want. We can argue. We could have polite debate, civil debate. I don't care. We can pretend that it's not true. But when you truly look into a capitalistic society, we have built this country and world. It is wealth that allows us to access the highest political bounds, the highest professional bounds, right? And create or make change. Nothing in this country happens without money. Now, you will also hear us talk about what wealth means because there's this real we're in a time in which wealth means something so different than it did 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right? And so when we think of wealth, we think of the top the richest people in the world, the billionaires, right? We're about to reach a point where we have our first trillionaire in the world. But wealth is all relative. Um, and where you are in the world, the value of the dollar and the place in the world that you are also, but also the society as a whole. There's a lot of research out there about what the average wealth of the American family of four is. And a lot of numbers put that in and around $40,000. So if you are a human being, especially a single person or a married couple, and you make more than $40,000 a year, then you are theoretically in the general scope of the world considered wealthy. For the purposes of life, wealth can only be defined by you. But I do think it's important to have a starting point or a baseline of understanding what wealth means, because wealth means freedom. It means options. It doesn't mean no boundaries. I mean, yes, there is a component of wealth that does mean that, right? But if I can look at my life and my career and my parents' career, we would be considered wealthy in the grand scheme of the world. Most of us listening to this would be, because we can access a podcast, because we have the internet or we have a phone. And okay, soapboxes again. Okay, so a huge catalyst to wealth is the access to education. And while globally, the access to education for girls and women is still fraught with hurdles, in this country, it is different. Now, it's not to say there are no hurdles, but in this company, at every single level of education, women graduate, girls, at higher levels than men. We're talking high school, we're talking bachelor's degrees, master's degree, PhDs, all of them. And the majority of high school and college valedictorians are girls and women. And so this push towards education is changing the economic access or the access to wealth that we as a group, as a gender, I didn't like saying that, but is those that want to do that. I don't know. I got messed up in that. I'm so sorry. But we're going to roll past it because whatever. The other really important thing in here is when we talk about color lines. And right now, the fastest group of people getting educated are Black and brown women. And this is huge. It's huge for our economy. It's huge for our growth as a country. And it is in levels never before seen. And this access creates opportunity. And it is this access that will drive income equality, right? We still have this gender gap that is out there, right? But right now, gender parity, they're saying it's going to take 5 generations, right? But that's 5 generations if we continue to do what we're doing today. The more and more women that are getting educated, the more and more women that are going into positions of power, leadership, whether it be local politics, federal politics, whether it be corporations, entrepreneurship, venture capitalism, right? All of these things have the ability to shrink that timeline and create advancements in that timeline. So all these things that happened, all this historical lesson that I just gave you, right? The laws that were enacted, the access to education, the access to sports, access to innovations that help make our lives easier, they have all pushed us forward. And as they do that, they have also changed the traditional or cultural expectations that we have as a country. So, for example, marriage. Marriage is a really interesting component if you look in this, right? So, when I was younger, right, my mom was married at a young age. She had me at the age of 19, and that wasn't unusual. When I think about my life, I thought I was going to have children at that age, but holy cow, I'm 48 today. I still don't think I'm old enough to have kids. And so, and I say that somewhat in jest, but it was babies having babies, right? And as we have progressed in education and access to wealth, we've seen the average age that women get married increase quite a bit. So, at last numbers I looked at, the average American woman without a college education was getting married at around her mid 20s, right? 26 ish. And the average American woman with a college education was putting it off into her 30s. So, by doing that, by pushing back marriage, by pushing back childbearing, because obviously that in most cases in a traditional heteronormative society also pushed back childbearing. What that did was a lot of interesting things. It created more time to become fully formed as humans, both for men and women, right? To understand what it was you wanted in life, what was important to you in life. We don't even, our frontal lobe or full brain doesn't even fully develop until the age of 25. So if we're getting married before then, right? Like, we don't know what we're doing. Makes you want to give your parents a lot of grace, right? But what it also did is created different consumer bases because even the term teenager didn't even come into our lexicon until the 50s. And I believe it was for a Corvette, but I might be wrong about that. A Camaro. It was some sort of a American muscle car that kind of created this teenage phenomenon. And teenagers became this really big consumer set from the 50s moving forward, right? But now we have this single 20 something set. And so you're creating these new consumer marketplaces that didn't exist before. And it lends itself to more inventions, more progress forward, and more abilities for companies and capitalism to rear its ugly and or beautiful head, if you will, because we're filling more holes for more people, because we're understanding that the needs are bigger or larger than we had initially thought. So then we're getting married, right? Or we were. Right now, it's changing very much right now, and you're seeing less and less women decide on marriage, and or pushing marriage back, right? We've got the ability to freeze our egg. We've got new fertility options. With financial means, it becomes easier to take on the role of parenthood without necessarily having a two-parent home. I wouldn't say easy is the right word, but it's a freer option than if you didn't have access to credit or home ownership and all of these things. And so by foregoing that time period, or getting married late, or getting divorced, which we know is also higher numbers, again, you're creating more consumer segments. You're feeding into this capitalistic machine and all of these things that do. And money drives that. And what happens is it is women that are becoming the consumers. And so we consume in different ways, right? So the quote that gets thrown around, or the data point that gets thrown around a lot, is that 80% of all purchases are made or influenced by women. When I speak in front of an audience, inevitably, if there are older gentlemen in the audience, and I would put older as any men over 40, inevitably there are one or two that shake their head in disbelief or audibly make a noise of disgust or disagreement in what I am saying. Fair, totally fair. But when you put it in context, it becomes this aha moment, and I watch it happen every time on their faces. Now, I used to make a joke, and then I realized how patriarchal and sexist even my joke was, right? So, look, we're all learning, and you can be an I am woman, hear me roar, raging feminist and still mess up, right? Because we have all been weaned off of a patriarchal culture. And I'm not even saying that in a negative way. That is just the realities of life that we are in. But I used to look at those men who were in disbelief and say, okay, let me ask you a question. If you went out today and bought a car or a motorcycle or a TV without telling your wife, where would you sleep tonight? The whole room laughs, and the man who was disgusted shakes his head and says some version of, okay, touche, right? Now, again, that's kind of this like sexist Leave It to Beaver TV show premise that I was basing it on. But then I would dig deeper, and this is the part that is the reality. The reality is we are all living longer lives than we used to. So we are living in most of the time in multi-generational environments. And it is women who tend to do the caretaking for those multiple generations. So if you are in a traditional heterosexual normative relationship, right, and you are married, you have children, the likeliness that you are the one as a woman making the buying choices and decisions for your children is very, very high, right? You are the ones buying their clothes, you're buying their food, you're the ones, the bake sales, the things for the PTA, getting them their equipment, their uniforms for sports, all of those things. You are also likely buying a lot of those same products for your husband. Now, I will say there are some more modern things with apparel choices and things like that men are making. So I don't want to blanket statement that. But in general, the household items and the things that involve making a home are purchased by the woman. And so she's making those decisions, right? And then you have aging parents, and not just the woman and her aging parents, but the husband and his aging parents. And oftentimes, the responsibilities for their caretaking, for helping them make financial decisions and moving forward, then also is put onto the woman. So now you've got this multi-generational buying structure that is created. Women are also the ones that are more likely to buy the birthday presents and the anniversary gifts and the provide for the potlucks at work, or if there's a card for someone who's out or had a baby, we're the ones that generally take on that labor or that additional kind of responsibilities in finances. And so it does create this arena in which we are making the financial decisions, whether the money is solely made by us or not. But even as a single person, right? I am a single woman with no children. I get to make all of my own financial decisions for me. But so much of my life and my financial decisions up until now were with the consideration of my multi-generational family with me. I'm the eldest. I'm the eldest child of 6, but also a girl, right? And so I took on this responsibility without even knowing it, right? And stepping in and helping where I could. I thought that in order to save for my future, that I couldn't save for me. I had to save for my parents, because what if something happened and I wasn't prepared to take care of them? That burden was something I thought about. And my brothers likely didn't think as much about. Again, this is not a dig at anybody. These are just the norms of society and the ways in which we are raised and the ways in which we are built to think about things and where our brains go, right? You also have the expectations of women that the Barbie movie so beautifully and eloquently said, right? There are expectations of us to look, be, present in a way that those same expectations are not put on men. And it is physical, it is mental, it is body, face, hair, mind, feet. You'll hear us talk about that later. All these things that men don't even pay attention to, but we have to. And so there's this additional financial or fiscal responsibility to keep up with those expectations that are not put on men. And then you have these items like the pink tax, which is in general about a 25% uptick in the price of products made for women versus the price of products that are made for men. There are tariffs in our government that are built around that. And so even when products come in on the ships from someplace else, there is a higher level of tax that is put on them when they are a product assigned to a gender that of woman than they are with men. And so that price gets passed on to us as a consumer. And so when you start to break all of that down, and there's much more, right? I'm clearly skimming the top of the bucket with all this information, because I also know how much information it is. And some of you may have already turned it off. I'm sorry. Not really, but whatever. But it's information that becomes this power for us, right? Once we understand all of the things that got us here, that put us in this situation, we get to decide as individuals, as communities, as collective societies. Okay, wait, hold up, what? Nice, right? That tariff is for no other reason than this. Ooh, we should look into that. And how do we then combat that and change that in our local community, in our broader state community, and then in our federal community and our government? And that is why I think a lot of this information, well, heavy and a lot and statistically history, right? I mean, I loved history, but not many people would say, "Oh, I can't wait to hear more stats, facts, and data." Um, but it is those facts, stats, and data that help us build the foundation or the platform for what we care about and how we go about making change in the universe. And I think level setting all of that is really important. It's how my company, Eliminate Girl Hate, was started. I was working for an organization, and we were going into the female marketplace and wanting to understand how it differed, right? And how could we help the retailers and the businesses that sold our products understand why we were entering into the female marketplace and why it made sense, right? You can't just push a product despite all the companies that do it. You cannot pink it and shrink it and just expect it to work. the world and the consumer is more savvy now, right? And we're looking for our needs to be met. And so you have to, this is gonna sound awful. Idealistically, we would understand, get to know a consumer, understand their needs, and then go into our lab and solve for those needs. But the reality is, a lot of companies go in, find those needs, and try to figure out how to tell the best story. And that is a lot of what marketing is now, whether it is telling the best story or building the best algorithm to take advantage of what we know about the consumer. And it can be scary if you don't have a base knowledge of what it is and actually what you really want, right? If you don't know what you want, then you're going to be willing to buy any and everything in the hopes that it's going to make you feel better, look better, be better, right? Solve all of the world's problems. And then you find out it doesn't, and you become disappointed, and you get in this capitalistic hamster wheel of dissatisfaction. And a lot of, gosh, this, I know, I know how deeply this is rooted, but it really does create what we're seeing in this world, this dissatisfaction of people, these alarmingly high depression rates, mental health disorder rates, and all of these things, because we've become this digitalized society who's looking for the next dopamine hit and takes a tiny little headline and uses it to extract or build what our value set is, instead of actually really digging in and saying, what do we care about? And a lot of us, myself included, we walk around like zombies because while being informed is important, there is such a thing as information overload and not allowing your system, your brain, your body, uh, your being to actually extrapolate all of that information to determine what it means for you. And so I'm not going to belabor the point. Again, this is an episode about level setting, the power of the female consumer. We have power at levels that we've never had before, but we may or may not. No, I'm going to say we're not, right? And I put myself in that category. I like to shop. Oh, girl, I love it, right? But for so long, I was doing it blindly. I was doing it to get the dopamine hit rather than using it in a purposeful way. And so I became this thing that I said I didn't like, but I was part of the machine. And I cannot blame myself, and I cannot blame the world around me. I can only learn from that and get better from it. And that's kind of the goal of this, is if we as women are going to continue to look for safe, equitable, and profitable spaces and success in the world, then we have to be able to learn and know and control how we capitalize on our strengths and our financial futures, security, wealth, all of those things, so that we can use it for our own benefit and our own advantage. And that is really the goal of this level setting. And it was a little messy here and there, and I hope that that was okay. It was hard because I was torn between how many stats do I bring out? I can bring them out, right? My brain doesn't always remember the exact numbers. And so then I'm reading off a teleprompter, giving you, and it's not, you're not feeling my passion, my zest, my excitement, and my hope for the future, for not just myself, but for all of us, that uh, we can, the word is so escaping me. It's not unionized, but we can collectively gather, grow, and move towards a future that has something of value for us and changes the world and makes it better for us. And by the way, not at the expense of others. This is what I will end on. A lot of people think feminism or react to feminism with a little bit of a gristle or an unease, right? Because they think that means you have to hate men, or that means that you do hate men. It means that you want less for men. And that is not what it is about. What this movement of diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI. Yeah, I said it. All of that is about giving everyone an equal shot, an equitable shot at this thing that we sold, the American dream. But here's the other thing. Why is it just an American dream? Don't we all dream about the same things? Don't we all dream about health, happiness, and prosperity? That is what we dream of. We dream of it for ourselves. We dream of it for our children. We dream of it for the people that we love. We should dream of it for everyone, because the lie that has been sold is that there's not enough for us all. When in reality there is, because if there wasn't, we wouldn't have or be on the brink of our first trillionaire. We wouldn't have double digits or however many digit billionaires that we have, right? There is no one human needs all of that money. I'm all for money, right? I'm bougie as heck. I really like the finer things in life. I'm not saying I don't want a lot of money, but there is enough to go around if we can simply understand that there is no need to fight against each other for it. We're fighting for each other, not against each other. So if you are a woman listening, I hope that this information gives you some grounding for figuring out, okay, where do I fit in this fight or in uh, this search and quest for my own rights as a woman and the rights for my children and all of those things, right? And if you're a man listening, I hope that you can see it as the opportunity for growth for yourself as well. Because feminism at its core, or if you don't want to use that word, right? Equal rights for all, equitable rights for all. If we look at that concept, all data points point to it helping everybody. Rising tides raise all ships. If you don't believe me, stop listening to pundits, stop watching news channels, and go and do some research and get that research backed, right? Don't just look at one data point and use it as your end all be all. Look at the progress of countries, civilizations, forward momentum, and look at how important women were to it. Look at how important women and men working together towards a greater cause has affected and impacted all of us for the better. That is what we need to look at. And to the men, because I just saw this on social media, to the men who say we need to return to a time of masculinity, maybe what we need to do is redefine what masculinity is and look at it in a larger context of allowing people to be whole and healthy and who they want to be. That is what our goal is. That is what I want for everybody, whether you are male, female, you are non-binary, whether you are black, yellow, brown, white, red, purple, pink. I don't care. I hated that I said the red, purple, pink part, but we'll leave it in there because even I mess up. Uh, Especially I mess up. It's just the idea that we can all win. And you can Pollyanna that or think that it's Pollyanna, but trust me, it is the opportunity for all of us to win and feel good about winning. And isn't that what we should hope for? So I hope that you will continue to listen. Like I said, we're going to bring a wealth manager in to talk about women in wealth. We're going to do a couple episodes with her. We're going to have this great episode with women working on intersectionality and this idea of pay transparency and how it benefits people of all backgrounds and all gender and gender identities. And we're really going to shine a light on what this looks like and how do we embrace our power, take control of it, and use it in productive ways. Make sure you check out, we have a blog post for every episode and we put all sorts of resources and information. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, share it with friends, follow us on social media. Help us build this movement of positive content that helps drive us all forward, because there's enough of that crap on the airways, right? Let's put some good stuff in there. And if you're interested in these types of topics and you want to be a guest, shoot us an email. We would love to feature you and tell your story. Until next time.